The scream tore through the forest before the sun had even risen. Lily Hart ran barefoot through the wet grass, her heart slamming against her ribs, branches whipping across her arms as she pushed deeper into the trees. Behind her, she could hear heavy footsteps crashing through the undergrowth, closing the distance with every second. She did not know who was chasing her. She only knew that if they caught her, everything would change. She had been living a quiet life in the Omega Quarter of Blackthorn for as long as she could remember, keeping her head down, asking no questions, drawing no attention. That morning, everything had unraveled in an instant. A stranger had appeared outside her window at dawn, whispering a name she did not recognize as her own. And then 2 armed guards had stormed into her small house demanding she come with them. She had run instead. Now, gasping for air, she stumbled into a small clearing and pressed her back against a wide oak tree, trying to steady her breathing. The footsteps behind her slowed, then stopped. Silence pressed in around her, broken only by the frantic beat of her own heart. A deep voice cut through the quiet. "You can stop running now." Lily turned sharply, ready to bolt again, but froze the moment her eyes met his. Alpha King Damian Cross stood at the edge of the clearing, tall and powerful, his dark eyes locked on her with an intensity that made her knees weak. He was not one of the guards who had chased her. He was something far more dangerous. The most powerful wolf in the entire kingdom stood only a few feet away, and he was looking at her as though she was the only person in the world. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, his voice softer now, though it still carried the weight of command. "But you need to come with me. It isn't safe for you out here alone." "Why?" Lily managed, her voice shaking. "Why is everyone suddenly so interested in me? I've never done anything. I've never asked for anything from anyone." Something flickered across Damian's face, an emotion she couldn't quite name. Sadness, maybe, or guilt. "There are things about you that you don't know yet," he said carefully. "Things that even I am only beginning to understand. But I promise you, Lily, no one here means you harm, not while I am king." It was the first time he had said her name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent a strange warmth through her chest, even as fear still gripped her spine. She did not know it yet, but this moment in the forest was only the beginning of a story that had started long before she was born. A story hidden in old bloodlines and buried secrets. A story that would soon tie her fate to his forever. 3 days earlier, the great hall of Blackthorn Castle had been filled with hundreds of pack members from every corner of the kingdom. Alpha families had traveled for weeks to attend the choosing ceremony, an ancient tradition where the reigning Alpha King selected his mate from a gathering of eligible Omegas. It was considered the most important event in the kingdom's calendar, a day that would decide the future of Blackthorn's royal bloodline. Damian Cross had dreaded this day for years. He stood at the front of the hall in his formal black coat, his expression unreadable, as noble families paraded their daughters before him one by one. Each young woman curtsied gracefully, hoping to catch his eye, hoping to become the next Luna of Blackthorn. Damian barely looked at most of them. His mind was elsewhere, weighed down by the responsibilities of his crown and the constant pressure from his council to secure a political alliance through marriage. His closest advisor, a sharp-eyed woman named Renata Cole, stood at his side throughout the ceremony, quietly listing the political advantages of each candidate. "The Ashford family controls the eastern trade routes," she murmured. "A match there would strengthen our borders significantly." Damian said nothing. He had heard this speech 100 times before, from 100 different advisors, about 100 different families. None of it moved him. Then the doors at the back of the hall opened, and the final group of Omegas entered. Among them was a young woman who seemed almost out of place, standing quietly near the back, her simple gray dress a stark contrast to the elaborate gowns worn by the others. She had no family standing proudly beside her, no noble title attached to her name. She was an Omega from a small, unremarkable household, brought to the ceremony simply because tradition required every eligible Omega in the kingdom to attend. Her name was Lily Hart, and she looked as though she wished she could disappear into the floor. Damian's eyes found her immediately, and for reasons he could not explain, he could not look away. There was nothing unusual about her appearance, not in the way the court would judge such things. She was pretty, certainly, with soft brown hair and gentle eyes, but she was not adorned in jewels or silk like the daughters of noble houses. And yet something about her pulled at him in a way none of the others had. It was not her scent, though it was pleasant and unfamiliar. It was something deeper, something that felt almost like recognition, as though some part of him already knew her. "Who is that?" he asked quietly, cutting off Renata mid-sentence. Renata followed his gaze, frowning slightly. "That's Lily Hart, an orphan, raised by a distant relative in the Omega Quarter. No pack lineage of note, no political value. I wouldn't waste your attention there, my lord." But Damien was already stepping down from the raised platform, ignoring the murmurs that rippled through the crowd as he crossed the hall directly toward her. Lily's eyes widened as she realized the Alpha King was walking straight toward her. She glanced around, half expecting him to be looking at someone else, but there was no one behind her. When he stopped just a few feet away, close enough that she could see the storm of gold flecked through his dark eyes, she felt her breath catch in her throat. "What is your name?" he asked, though Renata had already told him. "Lily," she said softly. "Lily Hart, my lord." "Lily," he repeated, as though testing the way it felt in his mouth. "Do you know why you were brought here today?" "For the choosing ceremony," she said. "Though I confess, my lord, I never expected to be chosen. There must be some mistake." A faint, almost surprised smile touched the corner of his lips. "There's no mistake." Before she could fully understand what was happening, before the hall had even stopped whispering, Damien turned to face the crowd and spoke the words that would change both of their lives forever. "I choose Lily Hart as my mate." The great hall erupted into stunned silence, followed by a wave of disbelief and hushed, furious whispers. Noble families who had spent years preparing their daughters for this exact moment stared in shock as their carefully laid plans crumbled in an instant. Renata's jaw tightened, her mind already racing through the political consequences of such an unexpected choice. Lily stood frozen in place, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain everyone in the hall could hear it. She had come to this ceremony expecting nothing, expecting to remain invisible as she always had. Instead, she found herself standing at the center of every eye in the kingdom, chosen by a man she had never met, for reasons she could not begin to understand. "My lord," she whispered, so quietly only he could hear. "I don't understand. Why me?" Damien looked down at her, his expression softening in a way that seemed strange for a man of his power and position. "Honestly," he admitted, "I don't fully understand it myself. But something tells me I made the right choice." That night, as the castle settled into an uneasy quiet following the chaos of the ceremony, Lily lay awake in the unfamiliar luxury of her new chambers, staring up at the ornate ceiling above her bed. Everything about her life had changed in the span of a single afternoon. She had gone from an anonymous young woman with no family and no prospects, to the chosen mate of the most powerful alpha in the land. She should have felt joy. Instead, she felt a deep, unshakable sense of unease, as though she had stepped into a story that had already been written long before she arrived, one where she did not yet know her own role. Down the hall, Damien stood at his window, looking out over the moonlit forest that surrounded his castle. Renata had come to him twice already that evening, urging him to reconsider his choice, warning him of the political instability his decision might cause among the noble families. He had dismissed her concerns each time, unable to explain even to himself why he felt so certain about a woman he had only just met. There was something about Lily Hart that called to the wolf inside him, something ancient and instinctive that he could not ignore. He told himself it was simply attraction, simply fate choosing his mate the way it was meant to. But deep down, in a place he did not yet dare examine too closely, he wondered if there was more to it than that. He had no way of knowing, not yet, that his instincts were leading him toward a truth buried so deep in the history of his kingdom that even his own family had tried to erase it. He had no way of knowing that the quiet, unassuming Omega he had chosen was connected to a tragedy from long before either of them was born, a tragedy that had shaped the very throne he now sat upon. All he knew, standing alone in the moonlight, was that he could not stop thinking about her. The next morning, Lily was woken by a soft knock at her door. A young maid named Grace entered, carrying a tray of breakfast and an armful of new clothing, far finer than anything Lily had ever owned. "Good morning, my lady," Grace said with a warm smile, though Lily could see the curiosity behind her eyes. "The Alpha King has requested your presence in the garden this morning, whenever you're ready." Lily nodded, though nerves twisted tightly in her stomach. She dressed slowly, unused to the delicate fabric of her new gown, and made her way through the unfamiliar halls of the castle, feeling every eye that followed her as she passed. Servants bowed as she walked by, though she could sense the whispers that followed in her wake, curious and skeptical in equal measure. She found Damien waiting for her in the castle garden, standing beside a fountain surrounded by early blooming flowers. He looked different in the morning light, less like the imposing king from the ceremony, and more like an ordinary man, dressed simply, his dark hair slightly tousled by the breeze. "I wasn't sure you would come," he admitted as she approached. "I wasn't sure I had a choice," Lily replied honestly. Something like regret passed briefly across his face. "You do have a choice, Lily. I know this is not how you expected your life to unfold. If you truly do not wish to remain here, I will find a way to release you from this bond, without dishonor." Lily studied him carefully, searching his expression for any sign of insincerity, but found none. It was the first kind thing anyone had offered her since the chaos of the ceremony began, the first acknowledgement that her feelings mattered at all, in a decision that had otherwise been made entirely without her input. "Why did you choose me?" she asked again, the question that had haunted her through the sleepless night. "You could have had anyone in that hall, someone from a noble family, someone who could have helped your kingdom. Why choose someone like me?" Damien was quiet for a long moment, watching the water ripple gently in the fountain beside them. "I've spent my entire life being told who to choose, what alliances to make, which decisions would benefit the kingdom the most. Every choice in my life has been calculated for someone else's benefit. Yesterday, for the first time, I made a choice simply because it felt right. I can't fully explain it, and I understand if that isn't a good enough reason for you, but it's the truest answer I have." Lily felt something shift inside her chest, a small crack in the wall of fear and confusion she had built since the moment those guards had chased her. No, since the moment he had chosen her name in the great hall. There was something genuine in the way he spoke, something that made her want to trust him, even against her better judgment. "I suppose," she said slowly, "we could try to understand each other, since it seems we're bound together now, whether either of us fully chose it or not." A real smile crossed Damien's face then, warm and unguarded, in a way that seemed to surprise even him. "I would like that very much." Neither of them noticed the figure watching from the castle's upper window. Renata's sharp eyes narrowed with suspicion as she studied the young Omega in the garden below. Something about Lily Hart did not sit right with her, and she had every intention of discovering exactly what secrets the girl might be hiding, secrets that could threaten everything the kingdom of Blackthorn had worked so hard to rebuild. For now, though, in the quiet peace of the morning garden, Lily allowed herself a small, cautious moment of hope. Perhaps this strange new life would not be the disaster she had feared. Perhaps, against all odds, she had found something unexpected in the man who had chosen her. She had no way of knowing how quickly that hope would be tested, or how deep the secrets surrounding her true identity truly ran. All she knew was that for the first time in her life, someone had looked at her and seen something worth choosing. And somewhere deep within her, in a place she could not yet name, an old and buried memory stirred, waiting patiently for the moment it would finally rise to the surface. The days that followed the garden meeting settled into a strange and delicate rhythm. Lily found herself slowly adjusting to life inside the castle walls, though the weight of being watched, judged, and whispered about never fully left her. Every meal in the great dining hall felt like a performance. Every walk through the corridors invited stares from nobles who still could not understand why their king had chosen an unknown orphan over the daughters of powerful families. Damien, for his part, tried to make the transition easier. He arranged for Grace to remain as her personal maid, someone familiar and kind, in a sea of unfamiliar faces. He ensured Lily was given free access to the castle library, the training grounds, and the gardens, wanting her to feel less like a prisoner and more like someone who belonged. Yet despite his efforts, an invisible wall still stood between them, built from months of expectation on his side and years of caution on hers. It was in the quiet, unplanned moments that the wall slowly began to crumble. One afternoon, nearly 2 weeks after the choosing ceremony, Lily wandered into the castle's training yard, drawn by the sound of clashing wooden swords. She found Damien there alone, shirt damp with sweat, practicing combat forms with an intensity that seemed to come from somewhere deep and restless inside him. She watched from the shadows of the archway for several minutes, unnoticed, before a misstep sent him stumbling, and a training blade caught him sharply across the forearm. He hissed through his teeth, more surprised than hurt, and it was Lily who rushed forward before she could stop herself. "You're bleeding," she said, kneeling beside him and reaching for the small cut without thinking. "It's nothing," Damien said, though he did not pull away. "A scratch. It'll heal before nightfall." "Let me look anyway," Lily insisted, tearing a strip of cloth from the edge of her sleeve and pressing it gently against the wound. Her hands were steady, despite the nervous flutter in her chest, and Damien watched her with quiet fascination as she worked, clearly unused to being cared for by anyone. "You didn't have to do that," he said softly once she finished. "I know," Lily replied, sitting back on her heels. "I wanted to." It was a small moment, barely worth mentioning to anyone else, but it settled something between them that words alone could not have accomplished. From that day forward, their conversations came easier. Damien began seeking her out during quiet hours, sharing small pieces of his life that he rarely spoke of to anyone. The crushing loneliness of leadership, the constant pressure of decisions that affected thousands of lives, the grief he still carried over his father's death years earlier. Lily, in turn, found herself opening up in ways she never had before. She told him about growing up without parents, raised by a distant aunt who treated her more like an obligation than a member of the family. She told him about the strange, fragmented dreams that had followed her since childhood, dreams of fire and shouting voices she could never quite place, dreams she had always assumed were simply nightmares born from an unsettled childhood. She did not yet understand how important those dreams truly were. One evening, as autumn settled over the kingdom and the castle gardens turned gold and amber, Damien found Lily sitting alone beneath a large maple tree, staring up at the darkening sky, with an expression of quiet sadness. "You look troubled," he said, settling down beside her without waiting for an invitation. Lily hesitated before answering. "I had the dream again last night, the one with the fire." Damien's expression sharpened with concern. "Tell me about it." "It's always the same," she said slowly. "I'm running through a burning building, and someone is carrying me, but I can never see their face. There's shouting all around us, and somewhere behind me, a wolf is howling, calling out a name, but it's never my name, not the one I've always known." A strange stillness settled over Damien as he listened, though Lily was too lost in the memory to notice. "What name does the wolf call?" he asked carefully. Lily frowned, trying to grasp the fading echo of the dream. "I never remember clearly once I wake up. It feels important, though. Like it matters more than I understand." Damien said nothing for a long moment, his mind turning over old stories he had heard whispered among the castle elders when he was young, stories of a rival kingdom destroyed generations ago, stories of a bloodline thought to have ended in fire and blood. He told himself it was simply coincidence, an old wives' tale colliding with an unsettled childhood memory, but the uneasy feeling in his chest refused to fade. "Whatever it means," he said finally, reaching over to gently take her hand. "You don't have to carry it alone anymore." Lily looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice, and for the first time since arriving at the castle, she allowed herself to lean into the comfort he offered, resting her head lightly against his shoulder as the last light of evening faded into night. Not everyone in the castle shared Damien's growing affection for the Omega who had upended so many carefully laid plans. In her private chambers on the far side of the castle, Renata Cole sat surrounded by old records and faded documents, working late into the night by candlelight. Ever since the choosing ceremony, she had made it her personal mission to uncover the truth about Lily Hart's background, certain that no ordinary orphan could have captured the Alpha King's attention so completely without some hidden explanation. Her search had turned up more questions than answers. There were no birth records for Lily Hart in any of the official Omega registries, no documentation of her parents, no trace of the household that supposedly raised her before her aunt took custody. It was as though the girl had simply appeared out of nowhere, sometime in her early childhood, with no verifiable history before that point. That kind of absence, Renata knew from long experience in the political shadows of Blackthorn, was rarely accidental. She thought of the old stories her grandmother used to tell, whispered warnings about the fall of the Ashgrove Pack decades earlier, a rival kingdom destroyed in a brutal war during Damien's father's reign. The official history claimed the entire Ashgrove bloodline had been wiped out in the conflict, their packlands absorbed into Blackthorn's territory. But there had always been rumors, quiet and persistent, that a single Ashgrove heir had survived the destruction, smuggled away and hidden among common Omega families to protect them from further violence. Renata had always dismissed those rumors as nothing more than folklore. Now, staring at the mysterious gaps in Lily Hart's history, she was no longer so certain. If the rumors were true, if Lily truly was the last surviving heir of a bloodline that Blackthorn's own royal family had helped destroy, the implications were staggering. It would mean the Alpha King had unknowingly chosen his mate from the very lineage his father had once tried to erase. It would mean old enemies, scattered across the region, might have reason to seek out Lily, either to protect her as a symbol of their fallen kingdom, or to eliminate her as a lingering threat to the peace Blackthorn had built over the following decades. Either possibility spelled danger, not just for Lily, but for the fragile stability of the entire kingdom. Renata closed the old records carefully, her mind racing through the political consequences of what she had uncovered. She knew she needed more proof before bringing such an explosive suspicion to Damien, something concrete enough that he could not simply dismiss it out of loyalty to the woman he was clearly falling for. If she had managed to piece together this much of the truth, it was only a matter of time before someone else did as well, someone who might not have the kingdom's best interests at heart. She needed to move carefully, and she needed to move quickly. Meanwhile, unaware of the storm quietly gathering around her, Lily continued settling into her new life at Blackthorn Castle, each day bringing her closer to the man who had chosen her, and each night bringing the same fractured dream of fire, and a voice calling a name she could not quite remember. She did not yet know that the answer to that mystery had been waiting inside her all along, buried beneath years of forgotten memory, waiting for the right moment to finally break free. And that moment, though neither she nor Damien could sense it yet, was drawing closer with every passing day. Word of Lily's rising place in Damien's affections spread quickly through the castle, and with it came a fresh wave of resentment from the noble families who still believed they had been cheated of their rightful opportunity. Chief among them was Lord Edward Ashford, head of the powerful family that controlled the kingdom's eastern trade routes, whose own daughter had been considered the leading candidate before Damien's unexpected choice at the ceremony. Lord Ashford requested a private audience with the king barely 3 weeks after the choosing ceremony, and Damien, ever mindful of maintaining peace among his noble houses, agreed to hear him out. "My lord," Ashford began, his tone carefully respectful, though his frustration simmered just beneath the surface. "I mean no disrespect to your personal choice, but surely you understand the concerns many of us share. This girl has no lineage, no connections, no way to strengthen the alliances our kingdom depends upon. In uncertain times, Blackthorn needs strategic strength, not sentiment." Damien's jaw tightened, though he kept his expression carefully neutral. "My personal choice of mate is not open for debate, Lord Ashford. I would ask that you remember that." "With respect, my lord, when the mate in question may affect the stability of the entire kingdom, it becomes everyone's concern." The exchange left Damien unsettled long after Ashford departed, not because he doubted his feelings for Lily, but because he knew the noble families would not simply accept her presence quietly. If Ashford was voicing these concerns openly, others were surely doing the same behind closed doors, and Damien understood all too well how quickly political dissatisfaction could curdle into something far more dangerous. He found Lily later that evening in the castle library, curled into a window seat with an old book of regional history balanced on her knees. She looked up as he entered, offering a small smile that eased some of the tension knotted in his shoulders. "You look troubled," she said, echoing the same words he had once used with her. "Court politics," he admitted, settling onto the bench beside her. "Nothing you need to worry about." Lily studied him carefully. "You know, you don't have to protect me from everything. I may not have grown up in a castle, but I'm not fragile, Damien. If there's something happening that concerns me, I would rather hear it directly from you than piece it together from whispers in the corridors." Her directness caught him off guard, and after a moment, something like respect flickered across his expression. "Some of the noble families are unhappy with my choice," he admitted. "They believe I should have selected a mate who could strengthen political alliances, rather than someone they see as unconnected." They're not wrong to be concerned, Lily said quietly, surprising him with her honesty. I understand their position, even if it stings to hear it spoken aloud. I have nothing to offer this kingdom in the way they mean it. That's not true, Damien said firmly, taking her hand in his. You offer something none of them considered valuable enough to measure. You make me want to be a better leader, Lily. You ask questions that challenge how I've always done things. That matters more than trade routes or noble bloodlines. Lily's cheeks warmed at his words, though a small, persistent doubt lingered in the back of her mind, a feeling she could not quite shake that there was more to her story than either of them yet understood, some hidden piece of the puzzle that might explain why fate seemed to have pulled her so unexpectedly into this world of politics and power. That same fragmented feeling followed her into her dreams again that night, more vivid and insistent than ever before. She stood once more in the burning building of her recurring nightmare, flames climbing the wooden beams above her as smoke thickened the air around her small, childlike body. Someone carried her tightly against their chest, running through corridors filled with panicked shouting and the terrible sound of fighting nearby. She could feel the frantic pounding of the person's heart against her ear, could hear them whispering urgently, though the words remained frustratingly unclear. Then, for the first time, the dream shifted. She saw a face, blurred and indistinct, but unmistakably a woman's face, tears streaking through soot on her cheeks as she pressed something small and cold into young Lily's hands. Keep this safe, the woman's voice whispered, clearer now than it had ever been in any previous dream. No matter what happens, you must keep this safe. It's the only proof of who you truly are. Lily woke with a gasp, her heart pounding wildly, her hands still curled tightly, as though clutching something precious, even in the empty darkness of her bedroom. She sat up slowly, breathing hard, trying to hold on to the fading details of the dream, before they slipped away entirely, as they always had before. This time, though, something remained. A single, clear image burned into her mind, a small silver pendant shaped like an ash leaf, warm from the woman's hand as it pressed into her own small fingers. She had never seen such a pendant in her waking life. And yet the image felt more real, more certain, than any memory she could actually recall from her childhood. Unable to fall back asleep, Lily rose and wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, making her way quietly through the darkened castle halls, toward the small garden courtyard, where she often went to clear her mind. The night air was cool and sharp, carrying the scent of the coming winter, and she wrapped her arms around herself as she walked slowly along the familiar garden paths. She did not notice the figure watching her from the shadows near the garden entrance until it was too late. Out for a late walk, Lady Hart? Lily startled, turning quickly to find Renata standing just a few feet away, her expression carefully composed, but her eyes sharp and calculating in the moonlight. I couldn't sleep, Lily said carefully, an instinctive wariness rising in her chest. She had noticed Renata's cool distance since arriving at the castle, though she had never been certain of its cause. Bad dreams, perhaps? Renata asked, watching Lily's reaction closely. The question landed with unsettling precision, and Lily could not fully hide the flicker of surprise that crossed her face before she managed to school her expression back into calm. Why would you ask that? Renata took a measured step closer, her voice dropping lower. Because I know things about you, Lady Hart. Things you may not even know about yourself, and I believe it's time we had an honest conversation about exactly who you are, and where you truly came from. A chill that had nothing to do with the cold night air crept down Lily's spine. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you? Renata's tone sharpened slightly. Tell me, does the name Ashgrove mean anything to you? Lily's breath caught, a strange, unbidden shiver of recognition running through her, despite having no conscious memory of ever hearing that name before. Somewhere deep inside her, something stirred at the sound of it, ancient and half-forgotten, like a door creaking open after being sealed shut for years. No, Lily said slowly, though her own uncertainty betrayed her. Should it? Renata studied her for a long moment, clearly weighing how much to reveal. Perhaps not yet, she said finally, but I suspect it will, sooner rather than later. When it does, Lady Hart, I would advise you to come to me before you go to him, for your own protection, and for his. Before Lily could press further, Renata turned and disappeared back into the shadows of the castle, leaving Lily alone in the cold garden, with far more questions than answers, and a growing, unshakable certainty that the name Ashgrove was somehow tied to the very core of who she truly was. She stood there for a long while after Renata left, staring up at the distant stars, turning the strange conversation over and over in her mind. Whatever secret lay buried in her past, it was clear now that she was not the only one who suspected its existence. And if Renata had already pieced together enough to threaten her with it, Lily understood with growing dread that time was no longer on her side. She thought of returning to Damien immediately, of telling him everything, the dreams, the pendant, Renata's strange warning. But something held her back, a deep, instinctive fear that speaking the truth aloud, even a truth she did not fully understand herself, might shatter the fragile happiness they had only just begun building together. Instead, she made her way back to her chambers in silence, curling beneath her blankets, as the first pale light of dawn began creeping over the horizon, her mind racing with unanswered questions that would not let her rest. Somewhere deep within the castle's ancient walls, in records long forgotten and locked away in a chamber few remembered still existed, the true story of the Ashgrove bloodline waited patiently to be uncovered. A story of fire, betrayal, and a single surviving child who had grown up never knowing the weight of the legacy she carried. That story was about to come rushing back into the light, whether Lily was ready for it or not. Lily avoided Renata for the following week, unwilling to face whatever truth the woman seemed so determined to reveal. Yet avoiding the conversation did nothing to quiet the questions now circling endlessly through her mind. The name Ashgrove echoed in her thoughts constantly, familiar in a way she could not explain, like a word from a language she had once known fluently, but had long since forgotten how to speak. She began spending her free hours in the castle library, quietly searching through old texts and regional histories, hoping to find some mention of the name that had settled so uneasily inside her. Most of the books offered nothing useful, filled instead with detailed records of Blackthorn's noble families and their achievements. But late one afternoon, tucked into a nearly forgotten section of the library reserved for older, water-damaged volumes, she found a slim book titled simply, The Fall of the Northern Pax. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it, scanning the yellowed pages until a chapter heading caught her eye, The Destruction of Ashgrove. According to the brief, carefully worded account, Ashgrove had once been a prosperous rival kingdom bordering Blackthorn's northern territory, ruled by a respected alpha bloodline for many generations. Decades earlier, during the reign of Damien's father, a violent conflict had erupted between the two kingdoms over disputed hunting grounds. The war had ended in devastating fashion, with Ashgrove's main stronghold burned to the ground and its ruling family entirely wiped out in the fighting. The book made no mention of any survivors. Lily closed the book slowly, her heart pounding as she tried to reconcile the cold historical account with the vivid, personal dream that had haunted her for years, the burning building, the desperate woman pressing a silver pendant into her small hands, the wolf howling a name that was not her own. If the official history claimed no survivors, and yet her dreams insisted otherwise, one of two things had to be true. Either her mind had somehow conjured an elaborate fantasy entirely disconnected from reality, or the official history was not entirely accurate. She thought immediately of Renata's warning in the garden, and a cold certainty began settling over her. That evening, she finally worked up the courage to seek Renata out directly, finding her in a small private study on the castle's eastern wing, surrounded by the same stack of old records Lily had noticed scattered across her desk during their brief encounter. "I want to know the truth," Lily said without preamble, closing the door firmly behind her. "About Ashgrove, about whatever you think you know about me." Renata set down the paper she had been reading, studying Lily for a long moment before gesturing toward the empty chair across from her desk. "Sit down, Lady Hart. This is not a short conversation." Lily sat, her hands folded tightly in her lap to keep them from shaking. "I've spent weeks searching for information about your background," Renata began carefully, "and I've found almost nothing. No birth records, no documented family history before the age of roughly 5 or 6, when you apparently came to live with your aunt. That kind of gap doesn't happen by accident, Lady Hart. Someone erased your history deliberately, and did so quite thoroughly." "Why would someone do that?" Lily asked, though some quiet part of her already suspected the answer. "Because," Renata continued, "there are old rumors, rarely spoken aloud, that a single member of the Ashgrove ruling family survived the destruction of their kingdom. A young child, smuggled away in the chaos, and hidden among common Omega families to protect them from further violence, their true identity buried so deeply that even they would never know the truth, unless someone chose to reveal it. Lily felt the blood drain from her face. "You think that child was me?" "I think it's possible," Renata said carefully. "More than possible, given everything I've uncovered. But suspicion alone isn't proof, and I have no intention of making accusations I cannot fully support." "And if it's true?" Lily's voice was barely above a whisper. "What happens then?" Renata's expression grew serious, almost pitying. "Then, you become the last living heir of a bloodline that Blackthorn's own royal family helped destroy, Lady Hart. You become a symbol, whether you want to be one or not, either to those who still mourn Ashgrove's fall and might rally behind you, or to those who fear what your survival could mean for the peace this kingdom has spent decades rebuilding. Either way, the moment this truth comes out, your life changes irreversibly. And so does the king's." Lily sat in stunned silence, trying to absorb the enormity of what Renata was suggesting. It explained the dreams, the strange familiarity of a name she had never consciously known, the deliberately erased history of her early childhood. It even explained, in some strange way, the pull she had felt toward Damien from the very first moment their eyes met across the great hall, though she could not yet articulate why that particular detail felt significant. "Does he know?" she asked finally. "Damien, does he suspect any of this?" "Not yet," Renata said, "and I would urge you to think very carefully before deciding to tell him yourself. This information, once revealed, cannot be taken back. It will spread through the noble houses like wildfire, and not everyone will react the way you might hope." "You're suggesting I keep this from him," Lily said slowly. "I'm suggesting you consider the consequences before acting rashly," Renata corrected. "I have not yet decided how or when to bring this matter forward myself, but I promise you, Lady Hart, the truth will not stay buried forever. Someone else may uncover it before either of us decides how to handle it, and that possibility should frighten you far more than anything I've told you tonight." Lily left the study in a daze, wandering the castle corridors without any clear destination, her mind spinning through the implications of everything Renata had revealed. She thought of the silver pendant from her dream, wondering if such an object truly existed somewhere, tucked away and forgotten, waiting to serve as proof of a legacy she had never asked for and did not know how to carry. She thought, too, of Damien and the quiet trust that had grown steadily between them over the past weeks. How would he react, learning that the woman he had chosen, seemingly by instinct alone, was connected to a tragedy his own father had caused? Would he see her differently, as a political liability, rather than the person he had come to care for? Or worse, would he see her as a symbol of an old enemy, someone to be watched with suspicion, rather than trusted with his heart? She did not know the answers, and the uncertainty frightened her more than any nightmare ever had. That night, sleep refused to come easily. When it finally did, the dream returned once more vivid and complete than ever before. This time, she saw the burning building clearly, saw the woman's face without any blur or distortion, kind eyes, filled with desperate love, even as flames roared around them. "Lily," the woman whispered, using her name for the first time in any version of the dream. "My brave girl. Whatever happens, whatever they tell you about who you are, never forget where you truly came from. The blood of Ashgrove runs in you, and it is not something to fear. It is something to be proud of." Lily woke, gasping, tears streaming down her face before she even fully understood why she was crying. For the first time, the dream had felt less like a nightmare and more like a memory finally breaking free after years of being locked away. She rose from bed and walked to her window, watching the first gray light of dawn creep slowly over the castle grounds. Somewhere out there, buried in old records or hidden compartments long forgotten, proof of her true identity existed. And somewhere close beside her, a man who had chosen her without knowing any of this, waited, unaware that the woman he had begun falling for carried within her a secret capable of reshaping the entire kingdom he had sworn to protect. Lily pressed her palm against the cool glass of the window, watching the sun rise fully over the horizon, and made a quiet, private decision. She would find the truth herself, before anyone else had the chance to use it against her, or against him. In the weeks that followed, Lily threw herself quietly into her search for answers, careful not to draw attention, while she pieced together fragments of a history someone had gone to great lengths to erase. She spent her mornings in the library, her afternoons walking the castle grounds with Damien, and her evenings lying awake, waiting for sleep to bring her closer to the truth hidden in her dreams. Despite the weight of her secret search, her bond with Damien continued to deepen in ways neither of them had expected. He began taking her beyond the castle walls, showing her parts of his kingdom she had never seen, despite having lived within its borders her entire life. They rode together through the golden autumn forests surrounding Blackthorn, visited small villages where common folk greeted their king with genuine warmth rather than the careful formality of the court, and spent long evenings sitting together on the castle's highest tower, watching the stars emerge over the darkening landscape. "I never expected this," Damien admitted one evening, as they sat side by side on the tower's stone ledge, a warm blanket wrapped around both their shoulders against the evening chill. "Ruling a kingdom, carrying the weight of every decision alone. I always assumed my mate would be chosen for political convenience, someone I would learn to tolerate rather than someone I would come to." He paused, seeming almost surprised by the direction his own words were taking him. "Come to what?" Lily asked softly, though her heart was already racing in anticipation of his answer. "Come to love," Damien finished quietly, turning to look at her directly. "I know it's happened faster than either of us expected. I know there's still so much we don't know about each other. But I don't think I've ever felt as certain about anything as I feel about this, about us." Lily's breath caught, joy and fear tangling together in her chest, in equal measure. Part of her wanted nothing more than to embrace this declaration fully, to let herself fall completely into the growing love she felt reflected in his eyes. But another part of her, the part still carrying the weight of Renata's warning and the unresolved mystery of her own past, held back, terrified of what might happen once the truth finally came to light. "I feel it too," she admitted honestly, reaching for his hand. "More than I know how to explain. But Damien, there's so much about me you still don't know." "Then tell me," he said gently. "Whatever it is, Lily. I want to understand you fully. Secrets have a way of growing heavier the longer they're carried alone." For a moment, she nearly told him everything, the dreams, the pendant, Renata's suspicions about her connection to the destroyed Ashgrove bloodline. The words rose to the edge of her lips, ready to finally release the burden she had carried alone for weeks. But fear won out at the last moment. Fear that speaking such an enormous, unproven truth might shatter the fragile happiness they had built. Fear that he might look at her differently once he learned what she might actually be. "There are things I don't fully understand myself yet," she said instead, which was, at least, entirely true. "Strange dreams, gaps in my memory from childhood that I can't explain. When I understand them better myself, I promise I'll tell you everything." Damien studied her carefully, clearly sensing there was more beneath her words than she was willing to share, but he did not press further. "Whenever you're ready," he said simply. "I'm not going anywhere, Lily." If only he had known how quickly that promise would be tested. 2 days later, Lily made a discovery that changed everything. While searching through an old, rarely visited storage chamber beneath the castle library, hoping to find additional historical records about the Ashgrove conflict, she stumbled upon a locked wooden chest tucked away behind stacks of forgotten furniture. The chest bore a faint, weathered emblem burned into its surface, a stylized leaf pattern that sent an immediate jolt of recognition through her chest. An ash leaf, identical to the pendant from her dreams. With trembling hands, she managed to pry the old lock free, using a discarded metal tool from a nearby shelf. Inside, beneath a layer of yellowed cloth, she found a small collection of personal items, a woman's hairbrush, a folded letter with faded, barely legible handwriting, and, wrapped carefully in a scrap of aged velvet, a small silver pendant, shaped exactly like the one from her recurring dream. Lily's hands shook as she lifted the pendant free, the cool metal warming instantly against her palm, as though it had been waiting patiently for years to finally return to her. She unfolded the accompanying letter with painstaking care, squinting to make out the faded ink in the dim chamber light. The letter was addressed simply to "My daughter," and though large portions had faded beyond legibility, enough remained for Lily to piece together its devastating meaning. The writer identified herself as Elena, wife of the last ruling Alpha of Ashgrove, describing in desperate, hurried handwriting the night their kingdom fell. She wrote of smuggling her young daughter out through a hidden passage, moments before Blackthorn's forces overwhelmed their stronghold, entrusting the child to a loyal servant, with instructions to hide her among common Omega families far from Blackthorn's territory, changing her name, and erasing any trace of her true heritage, to protect her from further violence. The letter ended with a final heartbreaking line that Lily read over and over through tear-blurred eyes. Whatever name they give you, whatever life you come to know, remember always that you are the last hope of Ashgrove. Wear this pendant close to your heart, and know that wherever you go, my love goes with you. Lily sat alone in the dim storage chamber for a long time after finishing the letter, clutching the silver pendant tightly in her palm, tears streaming silently down her face, as the final pieces of her fractured past finally clicked into place. She was not simply connected to the tragedy of Ashgrove's destruction, as Renata had suspected. She was the missing heir herself, the last surviving member of a bloodline that Blackthorn's own royal family had helped destroy decades earlier. The revelation should have terrified her, and in many ways, it did. But beneath the fear, she also felt something unexpected settle over her. A quiet, steadying sense of finally understanding who she truly was, after a lifetime of feeling like a piece was missing. She thought immediately of Damien, and the promise she had made him on the tower 2 nights earlier. She owed him the truth now more than ever, regardless of how frightening the conversation might be. But as she rose to leave the storage chamber, pendant clutched tightly in her fist, she nearly collided with a figure standing silently in the doorway. Renata stood watching her, having clearly followed Lily down into the forgotten chamber, her sharp eyes immediately falling to the silver pendant visible in Lily's trembling hand. "So," Renata said quietly, her expression unreadable, "it seems we finally have our proof." Lily said nothing, too overwhelmed to form a response, as Renata stepped further into the room, studying the pendant, with an expression that mixed vindication with something that looked almost like sympathy. "I need time," Lily finally managed, her voice barely steady. "Time to figure out how to tell him. Please, Renata, just a little more time before this goes any further." Renata was quiet for a long moment, weighing the request carefully. "You have until the end of the week," she said finally. "After that, Lady Hart, I cannot promise this secret will remain contained. Too many people are already asking questions. It's only a matter of time before someone else finds what I found, and I would rather the king hear this truth from you than from a rumor spreading through the noble houses." Lily nodded, gripping the pendant tightly, as Renata turned and left the chamber without another word, leaving her alone once again, with the overwhelming weight of a truth that could no longer stay hidden. She had 1 week to find the courage to tell the man she loved that she was, quite possibly, the greatest threat his kingdom had ever unknowingly welcomed within its walls. The week Renata had given her passed in an agonizing blur of forced smiles and carefully guarded conversations. Lily kept the silver pendant hidden beneath her clothing, its cool weight against her chest, a constant reminder of the truth she was still struggling to find the courage to speak aloud. Every time she found herself alone with Damien, the words rose to her lips, only to catch and dissolve into something safer, something less likely to shatter the fragile happiness they had built together. She told herself she was waiting for the right moment. In truth, she was simply afraid. Damien noticed her growing distraction, though he attributed it to lingering stress from the political pressures surrounding their bond, rather than suspecting the far greater truth she carried. He tried gentle encouragement, quiet reassurances that whatever burden she carried, she did not have to face it alone. Each time, Lily came close to confessing everything, and each time, fear won out at the final moment. On the 5th day, everything changed. Lily was summoned unexpectedly to a private meeting with Renata, only to find upon arriving that the meeting was not private at all. Several members of the Pack Council were already gathered in the small conference chamber, their expressions ranging from curious to openly hostile. Lord Ashford stood among them, along with 2 other noble representatives Lily recognized from the choosing ceremony months earlier. "What is this?" Lily asked, her stomach dropping as she took in the assembled group. Renata stood at the head of the table, her expression carefully composed, though something in her eyes suggested this gathering was not entirely her doing. "I'm sorry, Lady Hart," she said quietly. "Word reached the council before I could bring this matter to the king privately, as I had intended. Someone else discovered records of your search through the archives." Lord Ashford stepped forward, his expression severe. "Is it true?" he demanded. "The rumors spreading through the castle this morning, that you are the surviving heir of Ashgrove, hidden among us for years?" Lily's heart pounded wildly, as every eye in the room turned toward her, waiting for confirmation or denial. She thought of the pendant hidden beneath her collar, of the letter she had memorized word for word, of the truth she could no longer deny even if she wanted to. "Yes," she said finally, her voice steadier than she expected. "It's true. I only learned the truth myself a few days ago." The chamber erupted into a chaos of raised voices, some demanding immediate action, others calling for calm until the king could be properly informed. Lord Ashford's voice rose above the rest, sharp with accusation. "This is precisely the kind of instability I warned against from the very beginning," he declared. "An unknown Omega, chosen on instinct alone, and now we learn she carries the blood of a kingdom our own royal family once destroyed. Who is to say what loyalties truly lie within her? Who is to say this was not some carefully orchestrated plan from the very beginning?" "That's not true," Lily protested, though her voice was nearly drowned out by the growing commotion. "I didn't know any of this until days ago. I never sought out the king. He chose me, remember? I never asked for any of this." But her protest did little to calm the rising panic in the chamber. Fear, once ignited, spread far faster than reason, and by the time word finally reached Damien himself, summoned urgently from a meeting elsewhere in the castle, the situation had already spiraled well beyond anyone's control. He arrived to find the council chamber in an uproar, and Lily standing pale and shaken at its center, the weight of dozens of accusing stares bearing down on her from every direction. "What is going on here?" Damien's voice cut through the chaos like a blade, immediately silencing the room. His eyes found Lily first, taking in her ashen face and trembling hands, before scanning the assembled council with growing alarm. "My lord," Lord Ashford began, "we have just learned a matter of grave importance concerning Lady Hart's true identity." "And what identity is that?" Damien asked, though something in his chest had already begun to tighten with dread. Renata stepped forward, her expression carefully neutral despite the tension radiating through the room. "My lord, evidence has come to light suggesting Lady Hart is the surviving heir of the Ashgrove bloodline, hidden among common families following the destruction of their kingdom during your father's reign." The room fell utterly silent, every eye fixed on Damien as the weight of the revelation settled over him. He turned slowly to look at Lily, searching her face for some sign that this was a mistake, some misunderstanding that could be easily corrected. But the guilt and fear visible in her eyes told him everything he needed to know before she even spoke a single word. "Is this true?" he asked quietly, his voice carefully controlled despite the storm of emotion clearly building beneath the surface. Lily nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I found proof only days ago, Damien. I wanted to tell you myself, properly, not like this. I was afraid, and I let that fear stop me from telling you sooner. I'm so sorry." The council chamber remained tensely silent as Damien absorbed this information, his mind racing through the implications, personal and political, that this revelation carried. His father had led the campaign that destroyed Ashgrove decades earlier, a decision that had haunted the kingdom's relationship with its northern neighbors ever since. And now, entirely by instinct alone, he had chosen as his mate the very last surviving heir of that destroyed bloodline. Fate, it seemed, possessed a cruel sense of irony. "I need a moment," Damien said finally, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion. "Everyone, please leave us." The council members filed out slowly, though not without lingering, uncertain glances thrown back toward Lily. Renata paused at the doorway, meeting Damien's eyes briefly, before following the others out, leaving the king and Lily alone, amid the wreckage of a secret that had finally, catastrophically, come to light. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, the silence between them heavier than anything Lily had ever experienced. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Damien finally asked, his voice quiet but edged with hurt. "I was afraid," Lily admitted, tears finally spilling freely down her cheeks. "Afraid of exactly this, that learning the truth would change how you saw me. That you would see me as a symbol of your father's past, instead of the person you've come to know these past months." "That's not fair, Lily," Damien said, though his tone lacked real anger, more weighted with hurt confusion than accusation. I told you secrets grow heavier the longer they're carried alone. I meant that. I would have helped you carry this, whatever it meant for either of us. I know that now, Lily whispered. I should have trusted you sooner. I'm sorry, Damien. Truly. Damien was quiet for a long moment, staring out the chamber window at the kingdom he had sworn to protect. The same kingdom his own father had once led into a war that destroyed an entire bloodline. A bloodline that had somehow, against every possible odd, found its way back into his life through the very woman he had chosen to love. I need time to think, he said finally, his voice heavy with exhaustion. This changes things, Lily. Not how I feel about you, not entirely. But politically, this is far more complicated than either of us anticipated. Lily nodded, understanding, even as her heart ached at the distance suddenly opening between them. I understand, she said quietly, though the words felt hollow, even as she spoke them. Damien left the chamber without another word, leaving Lily alone, amid the wreckage of a secret finally revealed, uncertain whether the fragile love they had built together could possibly survive the weight of a truth neither of them had ever expected to face. News of Lily's true identity spread through Blackthorn Castle with devastating speed, and by the following morning, it seemed every servant, guard, and noble within the walls had heard some version of the story, each retelling more exaggerated than the last. Some whispered that she had been planted deliberately to seek revenge for her fallen kingdom. Others claimed she had bewitched the king with hidden magic to secure her position. The truth, complicated and uncertain as it was, seemed to matter far less than the fear and suspicion now spreading like wildfire through the halls. Lily remained confined largely to her chambers over the following days, uncertain of her welcome elsewhere in the castle, and increasingly aware of the guarded, suspicious glances that followed her whenever she did venture out. Grace remained loyally by her side throughout, one of the few people who continued treating her with the same warmth as before, though even she could not fully shield Lily from the growing hostility surrounding her. Damien, for his part, retreated into the demanding work of managing the political fallout, spending long hours in council meetings, fielding increasingly urgent messages from noble families across the kingdom demanding answers, reassurances, or in some cases, Lily's immediate removal from the castle entirely. Days passed without any real conversation between them, the distance growing wider with each hour spent apart. Lily understood the pressure weighing on him, understood that his silence stemmed from the impossible complexity of the situation, rather than any true change in his feelings. But understanding did little to ease the ache of missing him, of wondering whether the love they had built together over the past months could truly survive such an overwhelming test. On the fourth day of his silence, Lily finally sought him out herself, finding him alone in his private study late in the evening, surrounded by stacks of correspondence and old historical records concerning the Ashgrove conflict. We need to talk, she said quietly from the doorway, watching him look up with visible exhaustion etched into his features. Lily, he said, straightening slightly, though the fatigue in his eyes remained plain to see. I've been meaning to come find you. I apologize for the distance these past days. There's been so much to manage. I understand the political pressure, she said, stepping further into the room. But Damien, I need to know where we stand, not as king, and unexpected political complication, as us, as whatever we were before all of this came out. Damien set down the papers in his hands, studying her carefully across the dim study. I've spent days reading through every record I could find about the Ashgrove conflict, he admitted, trying to understand exactly what my father did, and why. It's not a comfortable history, Lily. The more I learn, the more I question decisions I always assumed were justified. What have you learned? Lily asked softly, moving to sit in the chair across from his desk. That the conflict wasn't as straightforward as I was always told, Damien said heavily. There were disputed territories, certainly, tensions that had been building for years, but the scale of destruction my father ordered, the complete eradication of an entire ruling bloodline, that went far beyond what the situation seemed to require. I always believed my father acted with honor in every decision he made. This history complicates that belief in ways I'm still trying to process. Lily reached across the desk, gently taking his hand. You are not your father, Damien. Whatever he did, whatever mistakes were made decades ago, that isn't your burden to carry. And I promise you, I hold no anger toward you for choices made before either of us was even born. I know that logically, Damien said, his voice tight with unresolved emotion. But emotionally, Lily, it's difficult to reconcile. My father's actions destroyed your family, your entire kingdom. And somehow, against every possible odd, I ended up choosing you as my mate without ever knowing the connection between us. Sometimes I wonder if some part of the universe was trying to correct an old wrong through us finding each other. Or, Lily offered gently, maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe we found each other because we were meant to, regardless of the history tangled up around us. I don't believe I was drawn to you because of some old political debt needing repayment. I was drawn to you because of who you are, Damien. Kind, thoughtful, willing to question even the decisions of a father you clearly loved deeply. That has nothing to do with Ashgrove or Blackthorn. That's simply you. Damien was quiet for a long moment, absorbing her words, before finally rising from his desk and moving around to kneel beside her chair, taking both her hands in his. I've spent the past few days terrified that this revelation would force an impossible choice, he admitted, between my responsibility to this kingdom and my feelings for you. But sitting here now, listening to you, I realize that fear was misguided from the very beginning. Choosing you was never a mistake, Lily, regardless of what bloodline runs through your veins. If anything, this revelation only proves how right my instincts were from the very start. Tears welled in Lily's eyes, relief flooding through her chest, after days of uncertainty and fear. Then what happens now? She asked. The council, the noble families, they won't simply accept this quietly. No, Damien agreed, his expression hardening with newfound resolve. They won't. But I am still their king, Lily, and I refuse to let old prejudices and outdated fears dictate who I choose to love. Whatever challenges come from this, we'll face them together, openly, rather than hiding from a truth that was never something to be ashamed of in the first place. For the first time in days, Lily allowed herself a small, hopeful smile, though the uncertainty of what lay ahead still weighed heavily on her mind. The council would not accept Damien's decision without a fight, she knew. Lord Ashford and others like him would push hard against her continued presence in the castle, using every political tool available to force her removal. But sitting there in the quiet study, Damien's hands wrapped securely around hers, Lily felt something she had not allowed herself to feel in days. Genuine hope that whatever battles lay ahead, they would face them together, rather than torn apart by fear and old, unresolved history. Outside the study window, storm clouds had begun gathering over Blackthorn's distant mountains, a fitting reflection of the political tempest still building steadily within the castle walls. The truth was out now, impossible to take back or hide away again. All that remained was to see how the kingdom and its people would ultimately respond to a king who refused to abandon the woman he loved, regardless of the complicated legacy she carried. Damien called for a full gathering of the Pack Council the following morning, determined to address the growing unrest directly, rather than allowing rumors and fear to continue spreading unchecked through the castle. Word of the meeting spread quickly, and by midday, the great hall stood filled once again, much as it had during the choosing ceremony months earlier, though the mood this time carried far more tension than celebration. Lily stood beside Damien at the front of the hall, dressed simply, but with quiet dignity, the silver ash leaf pendant, now worn openly around her neck rather than hidden beneath her collar. She had decided, after much thought, that hiding her heritage any longer would only feed the fear and suspicion already spreading through the kingdom. If she was to be judged for who she truly was, she would face that judgment honestly, without concealment. Lord Ashford stood prominently among the gathered nobles, flanked by several other council members who shared his concerns. As Damien called the hall to order, Ashford wasted no time voicing the fears that had been building for days. "My lord," he began, his voice carrying easily through the silent hall, "we understand your personal feelings toward Lady Hart. But surely you recognize the danger her presence represents. She is the last heir of a bloodline your own father worked to eliminate. Should word spread beyond our borders, we risk provoking old enemies, who may see her as either a rallying symbol or a target requiring elimination. Either scenario threatens the stability this kingdom has spent decades rebuilding." Murmurs of agreement rippled through portions of the crowd, though Lily noticed, with some relief, that not everyone present seemed to share Ashford's hostility. Several younger pack members watched the proceedings with expressions of curiosity rather than fear. and a handful of older members near the back of the hall exchanged quiet, thoughtful glances that suggested a more nuanced perspective on the unfolding situation. Damien raised a hand, silencing the murmuring crowd before responding. "Lord Ashford raises legitimate concerns," he acknowledged, his voice carrying the calm authority of a leader who had spent the previous days carefully considering every angle of the situation. "I will not pretend this revelation is without complication, but I would ask everyone gathered here today to consider something important. Lady Hart did not choose this legacy. She grew up entirely unaware of her true heritage, raised in obscurity, precisely to protect her from the very dangers Lord Ashford now describes." He turned slightly, gesturing toward Lily, who forced herself to stand tall despite the weight of every eye now fixed upon her. "The war that destroyed Ashgrove happened decades before either of us was born," Damien continued. "My father made decisions during that conflict that I am still working to fully understand, decisions that clearly caused tremendous suffering to innocent people who bore no responsibility for whatever political disputes led to that war. I will not compound that old injustice by punishing Lady Hart for a legacy she never asked to carry. With respect, my lord," Ashford pressed, "this is not merely a matter of personal sentiment. Should the surviving allies of Ashgrove learn of her existence, we could face renewed conflict on our northern borders. Should our current enemies learn of the political vulnerability her presence creates, they may attempt to exploit it directly. The risks extend far beyond simple prejudice." "Then we address those risks directly and honestly," Damien countered, "rather than hiding behind fear and secrecy, as this kingdom has done for the past several decades. I would rather face whatever challenges arise from the truth openly than continue perpetuating the silence that allowed this injustice to remain buried in the first place." The hall fell into tense silence as Damien's words settled over the assembled crowd. Renata, who had been standing quietly near the council's front row throughout the exchange, finally stepped forward, drawing everyone's attention. "If I may add something," she said, glancing briefly toward Lily, before continuing. "I was the one who first uncovered evidence of Lady Hart's true heritage. I did so out of genuine concern for this kingdom's stability, not out of malice toward her personally. Having spent considerable time investigating this matter, I believe there is a path forward that serves both compassion and prudence." "Go on," Damien said, curious, despite the tension still thick in the hall. "Rather than treating Lady Hart's heritage as a threat to be contained or hidden," Renata continued, "we could instead approach this as an opportunity for genuine reconciliation. If any surviving allies of Ashgrove remain scattered across the northern territories, presenting them with proof that their kingdom's heir survived, and now stands as Blackthorn's future Luna, could transform old resentment into renewed goodwill. It would demonstrate quite powerfully that this kingdom is capable of acknowledging past wrongs and working toward genuine healing rather than continued division." The suggestion drew a mixture of reactions throughout the hall, some nodding thoughtfully at the possibility, others still visibly skeptical. Lord Ashford's expression remained guarded, though even he seemed to consider the political merit of Renata's proposal. "It's a considerable risk," Ashford said finally, though his tone had softened slightly from its earlier hostility. "But I confess, it carries more wisdom than simply hiding Lady Hart away and hoping the matter resolves itself quietly." Damien looked toward Lily, silently seeking her thoughts on the unexpected proposal. She met his gaze steadily, drawing strength from the quiet support she found there. "I never knew my true family," Lily said, addressing the hall directly for the first time since the meeting began. "I never knew the people or the kingdom I was born into. But if there are others out there who remember Ashgrove, who mourn what was lost, I would welcome the chance to honor that memory, rather than continuing to hide from it. Not for political advantage, but because I believe every person deserves to know where they truly came from, and every kingdom deserves the chance to heal from wounds too long left untreated." Her words, simple and heartfelt, seemed to shift something in the mood of the gathered crowd. Even Lord Ashford's expression softened slightly, whatever remaining reservations he held, clearly tempered by the genuine sincerity in her voice. Damien reached for her hand, squeezing it gently, before turning back to address the full council. "Then it's decided. We will pursue this path openly, working to identify any surviving connections to Ashgrove, and using this unexpected reunion of our two histories as a foundation for genuine healing, rather than continued fear." I ask each of you to extend Lady Hart the same respect and consideration you would show any member of this pack, regardless of the bloodline she carries." The hall remained quiet for a long moment before scattered applause began, slowly spreading through the crowd until it filled the entire space. It was not universal acceptance, Lily knew, glancing toward the small pockets of nobles who remained visibly unconvinced. But it was a start, a genuine step toward the kind of open honesty that had been missing from Blackthorn's history for far too long. As the council meeting finally dispersed, Renata approached Lily quietly, amid the departing crowd. "I owe you an apology," she said, her earlier sharpness softened considerably. "I approached this situation as a threat to be managed, rather than a person deserving compassion. That was a mistake on my part." "You were trying to protect this kingdom," Lily said gently. "I understand that now. Thank you, Renata, for suggesting a path forward, rather than simply exposing me without any consideration for what came next." Renata offered a small, genuine smile, the first Lily had seen from her since arriving at the castle months earlier. "Perhaps we can work together going forward, rather than as adversaries. This kingdom could use more voices willing to choose reconciliation over fear." As Renata departed, Damien moved to stand beside Lily once more, watching the last of the council members file out of the great hall. "That went better than I expected," he admitted quietly. "It's only the beginning," Lily said, though hope had settled more firmly in her chest than it had in days. "But I think, for the first time, I actually believe we can face whatever comes next." Damien smiled, pulling her gently into his arms as the great hall finally emptied around them. "Together," he said softly, "whatever comes next, we face it together." In the weeks that followed the council's decision, Blackthorn Castle slowly began adjusting to the new reality of Lily's revealed heritage. It was not a smooth or entirely painless transition. Some noble families remained coldly distant, unable or unwilling to fully release decades of ingrained suspicion toward anything connected to Ashgrove. Others, particularly among the younger generation of pack members, seemed genuinely intrigued by the unexpected reunion of two histories, long thought permanently severed by war. Wan dedicated significant time and resources toward Renata's proposal, sending trusted envoys into the northern territories to quietly seek out any remaining connections to the fallen Ashgrove kingdom. Progress came slowly at first, decades of scattered displacement, making the search considerably more complicated than anyone had initially anticipated. But eventually, word began trickling back of small, isolated communities in the northern borderlands, who still quietly honored Ashgrove's memory, descendants of those who had fled the original conflict and never fully integrated into any other established pack. Lily insisted on being present when the first delegation from these northern communities arrived at Blackthorn, despite Damien's gentle concern that the meeting might prove overwhelming, given everything she had already faced in recent weeks. "I need to do this," she told him firmly, the morning of the delegation's arrival. "For years I felt like I was missing some essential piece of myself, without ever understanding why. These people might be the closest connection I'll ever have to understanding where I truly came from. I can't hide from that opportunity, regardless of how nervous it makes me." Damien nodded, understanding completely, and stood supportively at her side as the small delegation was formally welcomed into Blackthorn's Great Hall later that afternoon. The group consisted of 5 individuals, elderly community elders, alongside younger representatives, their expressions carrying a complicated mixture of caution and cautious hope as they were led into the hall. At their center walked an older woman with silver-streaked hair and sharp, assessing eyes, who introduced herself simply as Margaret, eldest surviving elder of the scattered Ashgrove descendants. When Margaret's gaze fell upon Lily, something shifted immediately in her careful, guarded expression. "By the moon," Margaret whispered, stepping forward slowly, her eyes fixed on the silver pendant still worn openly around Lily's neck. "That pendant. I would recognize the Ashgrove ash leaf anywhere, even after all these years." "You knew my family?" Lily asked, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and nervousness. "I served in the royal household before the fall," Margaret said, her voice thick with emotion as she studied Lily's face carefully. "I remember your mother, Lady Elena, very well. And I remember the night the kingdom fell, the desperate scramble to save what little we could, as everything burned around us." Tears welled in Lily's eyes as she listened, hungry for any fragment of connection to a mother she had never truly known, beyond fractured dreams and a single, heartfelt letter. "Do you know what became of her?" Lily asked softly. "My mother?" Margaret's expression grew somber. "She did not survive that night, child. She stayed behind to buy time for your escape, along with your father and most of the ruling household. It was always believed the entire bloodline had perished, until whispers began reaching our scattered community recently. Rumors of a surviving heir discovered within Blackthorn's own walls." The confirmation of her mother's fate settled heavily over Lily, grief and gratitude tangling together in a complicated knot within her chest. She had always suspected, deep down, that the desperate woman from her dreams had not survived the fire, but hearing it, confirmed so plainly, still struck with unexpected force. "Thank you," Lily said finally, her voice thick with unshed tears, "for remembering her, for remembering all of them." Margaret reached out, taking Lily's hand gently between both of hers. "Your mother would be immensely proud, seeing the woman you've become, not simply for surviving, though that alone is remarkable, but for choosing openness and reconciliation, rather than allowing old fears to dictate your path forward." Over the following hours, the delegation shared stories long buried by decades of quiet displacement, memories of Ashgrove's culture, its traditions, small details of daily life that helped paint a fuller picture of the heritage Lily had never known she carried. Damien listened alongside her throughout the exchange, quietly absorbing details of a history his own father's decisions had so violently disrupted, his expression carrying visible remorse, despite having no personal responsibility for choices made before his own birth. As the day drew toward evening, Margaret addressed Damien directly, her earlier caution having softened considerably over the course of their extended conversation. "My lord," she said carefully, "I confess we arrived here today uncertain what to expect. Decades of quiet resentment toward Blackthorn have shaped how our scattered community has come to view your kingdom. But witnessing your genuine welcome, and more importantly, witnessing the clear devotion between yourself and Lady Hart, I believe there is real possibility here for lasting reconciliation between our peoples." "That is precisely what I hope to build," Damien said sincerely, "not simply for political convenience, but because the injustice done to Ashgrove deserves genuine acknowledgement and repair, not merely quiet apology followed by continued separation." Margaret nodded slowly, clearly satisfied by his sincerity. "Then perhaps, in time, our communities can find their way back toward each other, using this unexpected reunion as the foundation for something far more lasting than the fear and division that has defined the relationship between our peoples for far too long." As the delegation prepared to depart later that evening, promising to return with additional representatives from their wider scattered community, Margaret paused beside Lily one final time. "Your mother once told me," she said softly, "that even in the darkest moments, hope survives in the choices we make afterward. Looking at you now, I believe she was right. You have transformed unimaginable tragedy into the possibility of genuine healing. That is no small accomplishment, child." Lily embraced the older woman warmly, feeling for the first time since childhood a genuine, tangible connection to the family and heritage she had spent so many years searching for, without even understanding what she was missing. As the delegation's carriages disappeared down the long road leading away from Blackthorn Castle, Damien wrapped a comforting arm around Lily's shoulders, both of them watching in thoughtful silence, until the last carriage vanished from view. "How do you feel?" he asked gently. "Complete," Lily said softly, surprising herself with the certainty of her own answer. "For the first time in my entire life, I feel like I finally understand who I truly am, where I came from, and where I belong. Thank you, Damien, for giving me the chance to discover that truth, rather than allowing fear to keep it buried forever." Damien pressed a gentle kiss to the top of her head, holding her close, as the last light of evening faded into the gathering darkness of night. "Thank you," he replied quietly, "for trusting me enough to share that truth, even when fear made it difficult. Whatever challenges remain ahead, Lily, I believe we're ready to face them together, stronger than either of us could have managed alone." Above them, the first stars began emerging in the darkening sky, silent witnesses to a reconciliation decades in the making, finally beginning to take root after so many years of buried silence and fear. Spring arrived early that year in Blackthorn, the castle grounds bursting into color, as though the kingdom itself was celebrating the changes that had unfolded over the preceding months. What had begun as a scandal capable of tearing apart the fragile peace of an entire kingdom had slowly transformed into something few had dared hope for. A genuine bridge between two peoples long divided by tragedy and silence. The northern delegation returned several more times throughout the winter months, each visit bringing additional Ashgrove descendants, eager to reconnect with the heir they had long believed lost forever. Lily welcomed each new visitor with open warmth, hungry to learn every remaining fragment of the heritage she had spent her entire childhood unknowingly missing. Slowly, methodically, the scattered pieces of Ashgrove's surviving community began finding their way back toward each other, drawn together by the unexpected symbol of hope that Lily herself had become. Damien, meanwhile, worked tirelessly alongside his council to formalize new agreements recognizing the northern community's right to re-establish a modest presence within the territories their ancestors had once called home. It was not a perfect solution, nor did it fully repair the deep wounds left by decades of conflict and loss, but it represented genuine progress, a tangible acknowledgement of past wrongs, paired with concrete steps toward lasting repair. Lord Ashford, somewhat to everyone's surprise, became one of the strongest supporters of the reconciliation efforts as the months progressed, his earlier skepticism gradually replaced by genuine respect for how Damien and Lily had chosen to handle such a delicate situation. "I confess, I doubted this path would lead anywhere but further conflict," he admitted to Damien one afternoon, as the two men reviewed updated territorial agreements together. "I'm pleased to have been proven wrong, my lord. This kingdom is stronger for the honesty you and Lady Hart have shown throughout this entire process." Renata, too, had transformed considerably from the sharp, suspicious advisor who had first uncovered Lily's hidden heritage months earlier. She and Lily had grown into unlikely but genuine friends over the following weeks, their earlier tension replaced by mutual respect and shared commitment to building something lasting from what had once seemed like an impossible political crisis. "I never expected we would end up here," Renata admitted one afternoon, as she and Lily walked together through the castle gardens, now fully bloomed with the first true warmth of spring. "When I first began investigating your background, I genuinely believed I was protecting this kingdom from a hidden threat. I'm grateful to have been wrong, Lily, more grateful than I can properly express." "You were only trying to do what you believed was right," Lily said warmly. "I understand that now, even if it frightened me terribly at the time. Besides, if you hadn't uncovered the truth when you did, I might never have found the courage to search for it myself." Renata smiled, genuine warmth replacing the calculating sharpness that had once defined nearly every interaction between them. "Whatever the path that brought us here, I'm glad it led to this. You've brought something valuable to this kingdom, Lily, something beyond simple political reconciliation. You've reminded all of us that honesty and compassion, even when difficult, ultimately build far stronger foundations than fear and secrecy ever could." As the spring season deepened, Damien made a decision that would formalize the profound changes that had unfolded over the preceding months. He announced plans for a grand ceremony, one that would serve dual purposes, celebrating his formal bonding with Lily as Luna of Blackthorn, while simultaneously marking the official reconciliation between Blackthorn and the scattered remnants of Ashgrove's surviving community. The ceremony, held on a warm afternoon beneath Blackthorn's ancient gathering oak, drew an unprecedented crowd, nobles and common pack members standing alongside northern representatives who had traveled considerable distances to witness this unlikely, hopeful union of two histories, long kept separate by tragedy. Lily stood beneath the ancient oak, dressed simply but elegantly, the silver ash leaf pendant resting prominently against a gown that subtly incorporated elements of both Blackthorn and Ashgrove tradition, a visible symbol of the reconciliation this day represented. Margaret stood among the honored guests, tears of genuine joy visible as she watched the ceremony unfold, undoubtedly thinking of the mother who had sacrificed everything to ensure her daughter's survival all those years ago. As Damien took Lily's hands before the assembled crowd, his voice carried clearly across the gathered audience. "Months ago," he began, "I made a choice that many believed was reckless, perhaps even foolish. I chose a mate, not for political advantage or strategic alliance, but because something deep within me recognized her as exactly right, even before I understood why. What none of us could have anticipated was how profoundly that single choice would reshape not just my own life, but the history of two kingdoms long divided by tragedy and fear. He turned to look at Lily directly, his expression filled with genuine, unguarded love. Lily Hart, heir of Ashgrove, Luna of Blackthorn, you have taught this entire kingdom something invaluable, that healing is always possible, even from the deepest wounds, when approached with honesty and courage rather than continued silence. I am endlessly grateful that fate, or perhaps something even deeper than fate, led me to choose you that day, without ever fully understanding the profound significance of that choice. Lily, tears of joy streaming freely down her face, squeezed his hands tightly in response. I spent my entire life feeling like something essential was missing, she said, her voice carrying clearly, despite the emotion thick in her throat. I never imagined that missing piece would lead me to an entire kingdom's worth of healing, or to a love I never thought I deserved. Thank you, Damien, for choosing me before you ever knew my secret, and for choosing me still, even after learning the truth. As the ceremony concluded, and celebration erupted throughout the gathered crowd, Lily found herself surrounded by well-wishers from both kingdoms, faces that had once regarded her with suspicion, now beaming with genuine warmth and acceptance. She caught sight of Margaret across the celebrating crowd, the elderly woman offering a small, proud nod that carried more meaning than words ever could. Later that evening, as celebrations continued throughout the castle grounds, Damien found a quiet moment to steal Lily away, to the same tower where he had first confessed his growing feelings for her months earlier. They stood together beneath a sky full of stars, watching the distant lights of the celebration still glowing warmly below. Do you regret any of it? Damien asked softly, wrapping his arms around her from behind as they watched the celebration continue below. The chaos, the fear, everything we've had to face together these past months? Lily considered the question seriously before answering, leaning back comfortably into his embrace. No, she said finally, certainty clear in her voice. Every difficult moment led us here, to genuine healing, rather than continued hiding. I would choose this path again, even knowing every challenge that awaited us, simply because it led to this, to us, to finally understanding exactly who I am, and exactly where I belong. Damien pressed a gentle kiss against her temple, both of them falling into comfortable, contented silence as they watched the stars continue their slow journey across the night sky. The story of Ashgrove's fall had once been a tale of tragedy and loss, buried deliberately beneath decades of careful silence and fear. But standing together beneath that same starlit sky, Damien and Lily understood they had transformed that old tragedy into something far more powerful, a story of resilience, of healing, and of a love strong enough to bridge even the deepest wounds history could inflict. Blackthorn's future, once shadowed by old secrets and unresolved guilt, now stretched ahead brighter and more hopeful than it had been in generations, built upon the foundation of honesty, courage, and genuine reconciliation that Lily and Damien had chosen together, rather than allowing fear to dictate their path forward. And somewhere within the quiet, contented peace of that starlit tower, the last heir of Ashgrove finally, truly, found her way home.